and I wanted to chit chat with you a minute about metallics. Everybody knows metallics. Hang on. Sorry. Okay, that's great. I am here to chit chat with you about metallics, and I want to. A lot of people have sent me messages. They've had some issues with metallics. So we're going to compare some metallics from different companies, and we're going to talk about how to get the smoothest brushless finish. Okay, let's get started. Hey, Kathy, how are you? Okay, so we're going to talk about Modern Masters metallics, who I love. Have you tried Modern Masters? They have great metallics. We're going to talk about Paint Couture metallics, which I have only tried a couple of times. And we're going to talk about Dixie Belle Paint Company metallics, which we were spraying in boot camp this week. So a lot of times when people are using metallics, they don't realize just how thin metallics are. Metallics are very thin by nature, and it doesn't matter which company makes them. They all are a little bit thinner than your average paint. So one of the first things you have to do is you have to think about the application. It needs to be applied with a good brush. Now, I love Dixie Belle brushes. They are the ones that I use primarily, but what I recommend is they just need to be a good synthetic brush. This one is by Chalk Pro. It's a 2-inch angled. There's also a lot of people like the Zebra Palm Pros. Those are good. There's a lot of them out there that are good, but the thing that they have in common is metallics go on better with a synthetic brush than they do with a natural bristle brush, in my opinion. The synthetic brush seems to lay them down more evenly, and you don't want something like a chip brush. A lot of times, if you use something like a chip brush, there's just not enough bristles to lay it down the way that you want it to. Now, you know me, optimally, I say spray it, but not everybody has a sprayer, so that's why we're going to go over this. The other thing you've got to remember is the body of it. Okay, so I am going to show you. We are going to put down a little bit of this. This is Dixie Belle's Tea Rose, okay? We're going to put it down on this board because I want you to see the difference that having a base coat makes. Now, the reason we are using Dixie Belle's Tea Rose is because I like it with rosé. It looks beautiful with rosé, but we're going to compare it side by side because I want you to see what it looks like. All right. Now, if you use a base coat that is in the same color field as the color that you're using, we're using Dixie Belle's Rosé, which is kind of a pink color. I don't know if you can tell from the light. It's a kind of a pink color. Actually, I have a picture. I have a piece down here. All right. This is Dixie Belle's Rosé, and it is, well, the light, I have morning light this morning. All right. It's a little shimmery. But it's a lot shimmery, but it's more shimmery if you have a good base coat underneath it, especially if you're going over raw wood or something, but it's definitely better if you have a base coat over it. So first thing we've got to do is make sure we have good bristles. And second thing is it does better over a base coat. Now, I'm not just saying that about Dixie Belle. I use, what is this, Brilliant White by Paint Couture. It has great consistency, but it is just like every other. It is very thin. When you put it on, you can see while it has good consistency as far as the shimmer and the shine, it is still a very thin paint. But it's exactly the same thing with Modern Masters, which is what I first started using before Dixie Belle came out with theirs. And I still use a lot of Modern Masters. They just have a great selection of colors. And not only are they have a great selection of colors, but this one's matte and it is platinum. But I have some of it's satin and some of it's shimmer. So it really depends on what you're looking for as far as metallics go. Okay, so now we're going to let that dry just a minute, and we're going to go over the other thing. Another thing to consider is whatever color your base coat is going to affect your final outcome. Because the metallics are so thin, we want to give it body, but if you use a dark color, you're going to get a more vibrant, more intense color versus a lighter color. And if you're staying in the same color field, there may not be as many choices, but if you're using something like a platinum or a brilliant white, either one of these, if you go for something a little deeper, if you go with a deep color, this brilliant white may not be a white metallic, but it will give it almost a pearlescent feel. Whereas if you use the platinum, you could use the platinum over something, what is this? Over like French linen, it is going to give it a great shimmer and shine. But if you put it over gravel road, it is going, unless you layer on several coats, it's going to give it more of a glaze illusion. All right, so let's see if we're almost dry. We are almost dry, so we're going to keep chatting. Good morning, good morning, good morning. How are y'all? So the other thing to consider is what you are putting it over. In this case, I'm showing you over probably the hardest thing for you to put metallics over, and that is bare raw wood. Raw wood, if you put metallics, actually, you know what? Let's see. We're going to grab this brush right here. We got a brush? All right. If you put metallics over raw wood like we have here, without any base coat, I'm going to show you right beside it. We're going to just put it on there. You're going to see, you can still see the grain of the wood. Whew, I know better than putting it on a dry brush, girl. All right, you're going to see the grain of the wood. All right, when I hold this up, you can still see the grain of the wood. Well, if it would cooperate, you could. You can still see the grain of the wood through that. All right, that is only one coat. Now, typically, most metallics will say that you need several coats, and that is if you don't have a base coat underneath. The thing I do like about Dixie Belle, well, I like about all of them is once I put that base coat under there, then it starts building up and giving me that depth of shimmer, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I'm looking for. A lot of times it depends on your project too, because like I say, you can get a matte, you can get satin, you can get shimmer, you can get so many different finishes that it's crazy. I mean, it's really crazy. But what you have to decide is what your project. Do you want to put this on over a dark color and have it look more like a glaze, or are you looking for that rich color on, let's say, a dresser? You want a metallic dresser. Okay, if that's what you're going for, then I definitely would put a base coat on, but not only put that base coat on, go ahead and put on several layers. I would put on at least 3 coats of the metallic a lot of times, just so that it gives you the depth. Now, another thing you can do is you can use these. These are Whiz concave rollers. A lot of people don't believe in rolling metallics, but I'm telling you, these Whiz rollers, I think you can get them on Amazon. I know we sell them, but these are the bomb diggity. Let me tell you, as far as getting on a nice even coat, because once, let's see if yes, we are dry. Okay, once you get your base coat on and it's dry, and you put your first coat on, make sure it is a nice, even coat, okay? You want to make sure, sorry. You want to make sure that it's a super even coat. And don't be too free with it. Don't put it on so that it puddles or anything like that. You just want to put it on so that it covers your base coat with a nice, even coat. I'm going to show you. All right. So now I've got my first coat of metallics on, and I'm going to hold it up here so that you can see it. It's on the end there, and there's the one beside it. So you can see it's a much, much, much deeper coat. And that is because it has a base coat underneath. Now, I could have put more, if I had gotten here earlier, I could have put in a couple of coats, but typically you only need 1 coat of your base coat, and then that's when you begin layering the metallics. Now, that's where you need to take your time. When you put your first coat of metallics on, you allow that to dry. And if you notice brush strokes, which a lot of times you will, especially with the first coat, you can take a very high grain sandpaper. And when I say high grain, I like to get it at the automotive shop. It's usually about 2,000 to 4,000 grit sandpaper. It's made for working on cars, and you go over it very lightly, and it'll get rid of every one of those brush strokes and get ready for your next coat of metallic paint. But not everybody has an auto shop in like AutoZone or any of those like that. I think you can order it from Amazon. I'll drop the link in here for you. But that is a great way to do it. But if you don't have the high grain sandpaper, you know, you can burnish it. You can take super fine steel wool and go over it lightly. But if you're working with a really light color like the brilliant white or the rosé, sometimes the steel wool will stain it, for lack of a better word. So another thing that you can use is you can take a paper bag and burnish it. Either way, you just want to take your time and go in between there. So you go over that, you've got your base coat and it's dry. You put on your first coat of your metallic and it's dry. You burnish it so that you get it nice and smooth. And what you're doing is you're creating a great layer for each one to build on. So then you go over it with your second one. Now, this is where personal preference comes in, because personal preference is going to be what dictates how many coats of your metallics. Like I say, all of these are very comparable metallics, whether you're doing Modern Masters, you're doing Paint Couture, or you're doing Dixie Belle metallics. They're all very comparable, and it just depends on what the need is that you're working with. But once that first coat of metallics dries, you put on your second coat, you allow it to dry. Now, I continue to either burnish or lightly sand with it. I usually use about a 3,000 to 3,000 grit, and I go over it. And basically what I'm doing is burnishing, and you burnish it to the point that there are no brush strokes. Now, if you're spraying or you're rolling, it's a little bit different. The rolling, you still need to burnish somewhat, but not nearly as much as if you're brushing. But if you're spraying and you get a nice even spray on each level, then most of the time, all you need is the slightest burnish, maybe about 2 to 3 layers in. That's the other thing. When you're spraying, you can actually control the depth of it better than others. But again, don't try to do one heavy coat to get the level of shimmer that you're looking for, because what you're wanting is a depth of pigment and a depth of shimmer. And doing one coat, sometimes one heavy coat, sometimes you're going to get running and different things like that. So that's why I always recommend put on a base coat of some color, then go back in and put your first coat on, allow it to dry, burnish, put your second coat on, allow it to dry, burnish, and just see where you are. I think maybe it was Modern Masters. I read at one time that it recommends up to 6 coats of their metallics. So now I have not read that on the others, and I sell Dixie Belle paint and have for many years. I have not seen that on theirs, but I do believe that maybe it was last year or the year before, one of the jars that I was reading, because who knew it? You can read instructions on paint. It said that it may take up to 6 coats to get the desired coverage. So that's why I just wanted to go on here. I know a lot of people are really into using metallics right now, and just about any kind of sprayer will spray metallics because they are on the thin side for paint and such. And it's going to give you great coverage if you are, if you've got a decent sprayer and you take your time and spray across it. But don't think that you need a sprayer to get a good finish. All it takes is a good brush, some patience, a base coat, and some way to burnish it or sand it. Now, typically, my last coat, I don't burnish afterwards. Now comes the question. A lot of people always ask me, do you top coat metallics? What do you top coat metallics with? Whatever you top coat metallics with can dull the shine. So be mindful of that. Most metallics already have a polymer built into it, so they don't require a top coat. But, it's like everything else. It's great to have a top coat. So I would suggest if you are going to top coat your pieces, let's say you want to put a water repellent top coat on there. You are going to need to find something that matches the shimmer that you're going for. So if you have put a metallic on there, you're going to want a glossy top coat, because otherwise, if you put a matte top coat over a rosé, it's going to take away some of the shine that you worked so hard to get. So just think everything through when you're working on a finish, and know that to get great metallic finishes sometimes takes a little bit of patience, but it takes some planning. Make sure you've got that base coat, make sure you've got a good brush, make sure you've got a way to burnish it, and make sure that your environment is good for it. Because if you've got an environment where there's a lot more humidity, welcome to the South, then you will see that it does take a little bit longer for it to dry, and you want it to dry completely, because when you're layering, especially when it involves brushing and burnishing, if you don't allow it to dry completely, especially in a high humidity type environment, you can lift up the coat before, you can scratch it, you can mar it. There's a lot of things that can happen. So just when you're looking for a good finish with any paint, but especially metallics, they can be a little finicky. And what we want to do is just be patient. Use our base coat, use a good brush. You may need a little bit of water. If you're in a dry environment, you may need a mixture bottle, but you just want to take your time and look at each one. But burnishing or lightly sanding with a high grain sandpaper makes all the difference in the world as far as those brush strokes go. So this is my Friday morning live, my very first one. We are going to be here at 9 a.m. on Friday mornings, and I am happy that you tuned in this morning. I hope y'all have an incredible weekend. It's supposed to be kind of pretty here, and I am headed out to hang cabinet doors. Thanks for watching, y'all, and I will see you Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Bye, y'all.